Anybody, just whatever you think it is.
When I think of framework, I think of some sort of program that someone has written to simplify raw code, so that you're not having to write in raw code, maybe, so that it's taking maybe like an abbreviated version of code, or it's got some pre-written code that you can use to do common things that you may want to do, and it's fully customizable if you want to, but there are also like built-in things, sort of like Bootstrap, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, like Bootstrap is definitely a CSS framework. A library is also kind of what you kind of described, where somebody else wrote a bunch of code and you can use that code and customize that code. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of partially that. Does anybody else have any, when you hear of a software framework? So essentially a framework is an idea or an ethos or a foundation of instruction. So a bunch of developers got together and thought, hey, we think this is the best way to build web applications. And so a bunch of developers came together and developed Django as a framework, because they all thought, hey, this specific way is the best way to build web applications. And so that's how Django essentially became Django. Now, different frameworks have different ideas or different ethos or different ideas of how that specific framework or that specific web applications should be built, or that specific idea how it should be built. So Django is one. There's like also Flask. Different languages have different frameworks. There's like, for front end frameworks, there's React. There's Vue.js, there's Angular, there's all kinds of different front-end frameworks. And essentially, they're just ideas of how people think the best way to build a web application. And Django is essentially that, a set of instructions or a foundation of how a web application should be built, or at least how the Django developers think a web application should be built. So if you think of like salad dressing as an example, there's many different types of, like if you're thinking of like Italian dressing. So Italian dressing has like specific ingredients that are different so Italian dressing has a specific like framework, like how it should taste and everything, and it consists of ingredients. However, there's many different recipes of salad dressing. So if you create a salad dressing, you're like, hey, this is how I think the Italian dressing should be and taste, whereas I might have a different set of recipes or a different recipe that says, hey, no, I think this is how it should be. So if you think of like a framework as as a recipe to create something, different people have different recipes to achieve the same thing. So your Italian dressing recipe will also achieve the taste of an Italian dressing, where mine also will, but they kind of combine different ingredients to get the same outcome.
Are there frameworks that like people don't use that do get created then?
That don't like actually, that don't.
Yeah,
don't,
like maybe
that
somebody
used.
thought it was a good idea, but nobody liked it, and then it just like disappears.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there are. Like that's the whole thing around frameworks, is that like more than one person has to think that that's a good idea.
Yeah, there's a JavaScript in particular. There's always a new framework, like React.js, which we're learning later, is very popular. But before that, the new hotness was Angular, and before that, it was Backbone. So,
yeah. So yeah, like JavaScript's always coming up with new frameworks. So yeah, all right, and we'll cover more about Django later on in this week once we actually go full into building full stack applications. But right now we're going to be using Django, but we're specifically using a small part of it, which is Django's ORM to interact with Postgres. So Django, this is where we're using virtual environments a lot. So Lou, can you tell me what a virtual environment is?
Yeah, virtual environment is, I guess, is a way to have control over which libraries you imported. So in this virtual environment, if I install Django, Django would exist inside that environment and not outside of it.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, exactly. So a virtual environment is like a little bubble in your computer, which you can install libraries and different packages or frameworks on it. It won't affect the other parts of your machine. So Django consists of, you'll hear a project. So a Django project consists of many different applications. So just think of that. So a Django project can have many apps. And it's all going to be within a virtual environment. So if you think of a project, where a project is in fact an application. So if you think of a project as the company of Amazon, so that's the project, that's our Django project. And then inside of our Django project, inside of Amazon, has many different applications, such as like a billing app, an orders app, some, inventory management system, or an ERP system. So all these little different consumer checkout are different applications within a Django project. What questions do you have so far? So we have our Django project at the top, and then inside our Django project, we're going to be building many different applications, or up to many different applications. But right now, we're pretty much going to be building only one app inside of our Django project. All right. So we're going to walk through all this stuff, but I just kind of want to show you the different, the process and of how to create a Django project. So the steps are, we're going to create a virtual environment using the Python-m space v and the name of the virtual environment up here. Then we're going to go into our virtual environment. And so that's represented by this big blue bubble. And then inside our virtual environment, we're going to install Django because, again, a virtual environment doesn't have anything installed in it. So we actually have to install Django first. And then we're going to be using built-in Django commands to build projects and applications and other items. So once we install Django, we actually have to create a project, the bigger project. And that's done by the command Django-admin start project followed by the project name. So that actually creates a project. Then within our project, we have to create an application. And we run that by doing this Python manage.py start app followed by our app name. Again, we're going to walk through all this stuff. And this manage.py file is going to be the entry point into our application. So we're going to be running Python manage.py followed by commands quite a bit. So we can start app 1, app 2, app 3. And then once we get into an app, or once we're actually in the Django project, again, there's that manage.py file we're going to see. And this is the entry point into our app. And we're going to run Python manage.py followed by other commands. And then inside our Django project, we're going to have a settings file. So this is where we're going to actually have to modify it. It's already pre-built for us. There's already a lot of configuration in there, but we're going to have to add some stuff to our settings.py file. So if we want to add a Postgres database or any type of database other than the default one, we're going to have to add it in our settings.py file. We're going to have to add our other applications in our settings.py file and just any other types of configurations that we might need in the future. And again, we're going to walk through all this. And then once we're actually in our Django project and in our application that we created in our Django project, inside of our app, it's going to already come with a bunch of files and a bunch of directories already there for us as a template, or I would say as a blueprint to build upon. So we have our models or our tables, just like our SQL tables. This is where we're going to write our, create our database tables. We have our views. We have our templates, migrations, URLs, forms, serializers, and plenty more. You don't have to worry about any of this now except for the models table or the models file, as well as the migrations directory. So this is what we're going to be working in the next 3 days. Does anybody have any questions? Or what questions do you have so far? It's kind of a lot to take in initially, but we're going to walk through this and we're going to keep on repeating this process just like we do a lot. All right, so within our models file, this is again where we're going to actually be creating our tables, our Postgres tables. What's nice about Django's ORM is that all we're doing is writing classes that represent tables. So just like we've been doing in OOP, like class person or class, student, we're going to be doing the same thing. And that stuff is that when we create those classes, it's going to map over to SQL. So that's why we call it an ORM, because in our models.py file, we're going to create we're going to create class objects. So if this looks familiar, this is from assessment 3. So we can create a class called customers, a class called orders, a class called products, and a class called categories. And then when we go ahead and migrate or run this file or run some commands, it goes through Django's ORM, object relational mapping, which converts these class objects into SQL scripts or Python scripts that then translates to raw SQL and inserts these class objects into tables that can be put into our Postgres database. What questions do you have? Do I have anything else? So this is kind of what it will look like. So in our models.py file, we have a class called student that inherits a model, inherits from the models class, from the built-in Django database models class. And we call, for example, this class with a table of student has a field of name and a field of email. And each name and field has a character field, or is a character field with a max length of 200, and email has a max length of 200 as well. So we're using OOP to create our tables. And then in order to push that into our database, we create a migration script called Python manage.py make migrations, followed by the app name, or you don't necessarily need the app name there. And then it creates what is called a script file, or a migration script file, that when we run this migration script file by running Python manage.py migrate, which will actually migrate the student OOP class into raw SQL and put it into our database.
Hey, Tom, I've got a quick question on that.
Yep.
So I noticed there's no self.name, there's no class. It doesn't look like there's any
Instance variables.
Yeah.
Yep. That is typical when creating just the field names. So you're not going to have self.name, self.email.
Okay. So in the class, like, we're not going to use the student class. Like, it's not going to be built out like with a bunch of different methods. This is just like creating a specific class for a specific table, basically.
Yeah, and you can build class methods off of this, but we're not going to get into that until I think later. I think in validators you'll be able to create class methods, but we're going to get into that later on. I think in either tomorrow or Wednesday. What other questions do you have?
There's no init, def init either.
Nope, no init either.
So that's Okay. And this, so it's basically getting everything from models.model then.
Yeah, so it's inheriting all the functionality from this models.model class, and that's being imported from the Django database library.
Okay.
All right. What other questions? All right. Let's run into, let's go through all these different commands then up here. So I'm in my Django ORM directory just to create a simple Django application or Django project. The first thing I need to do is create a virtual environment. Let's zoom in. Whoa. Is that good? Can you guys see that? So first thing I'm gonna do is create a virtual environment, Python -m, there's VE&V. I'm gonna call it virtual environment, like VE&V.
Tom, what does ORM stand for?
Object relational mapping.
Ah,
So right here.
got it. Thanks.
So I created a virtual environment right here, VE&V. Now I need to go into my virtual environment. What's the command to enter a virtual environment? As a,
We got source.
what was it?
Source.
Source.
Then v bin activate.
VENV, bin activate. So now I'm currently in my virtual environment, like so. Now, so I'm in my virtual environment. Now I need to pip install Django. Because if I do pip list, nothing's in here. I've got the pip and setup tools, but now I can do pip install Django. It's going to install the Django framework. And Django is really popular, and it's got really good documentation. So a lot of the next few days, you're going to be reading a lot of Django's documentation just to understand Django better. So now if I list it, so I've got Django in here. It looks like it comes with some other libraries as well. So now I can actually start a Django project. And so I can do Django admin space start project followed by the project name. So Django admin start project. I'm going to call it, what should I call it? School project. Uh-oh, I got an error. It says command error. School-project is not a valid project name. Please make sure the name is a valid identifier. So you can't use dashes when you're creating projects. So, but you could use underscores. So I'm going to do Django admin start project school _ project. All right, nothing broke. But now let's open up here, and you can kind of see right here, I've got my school project that is created. And when I open up my school project, notice how it has another folder in here called school project as well, followed by that manage.py file. So just like here, I've got my Django project and I've got my manage.py file right there. So inside my actual school project, so it's going down 2 levels, school project into school project. We have our settings.py file. All this stuff is already given to us. We have this init.py, asgi.py, settings.py, urls.py, and wsgi.py file. You really won't be touching these ASGI and WSGI files yet. Pretty much I don't think you will be touching them at all throughout the course. I think this stands for Web Server Gateway Interface or something, but you don't need to know really much about it. The URLs, we'll get into this once we actually start building applications, but this is exactly where your routes go. But the settings.py file, this is where we're going to be doing a lot of putting a lot of stuff in here. So you have all this stuff that's already given to us. So you got our databases. So this is the default database is a SQLite database, but we're going to be using a Postgres database. So we're going to be adjusting this here shortly. And also we have this installed apps. So this is where we're going to be putting in our installed apps once we create applications. And Django already comes with a bunch of these apps already installed for us. Content types, sessions, messages, static files, admin. But we'll cover more of this on Thursday. So I created a project called School Project. Now I need to create an application. So again, manage.py, you don't need to worry about. I need to create an application. In order to do that, we run Python manage.py, start app, followed by the app name. So I come over here. Let's do, I'm going to list everything out. So I'm currently not in my school project yet because I need to run Python manage.py. So I need to get on the same level. So I can cd into school project. And I'll list everything out. And there, now I'm on my manage.py file. And this is the level I'm going to be running all these commands on. So I can run Python manage.py, start app. Is it start app? Yep. Followed by the app name, whatever app I want to create. I'm going to create an attendance app for the school project. So I click enter, and notice over here, I've got my attendance app that's created now. What questions do you have about that whole process? All right. So I created my application. This is where we're at so far. All right.
Tom, by application, you mean you're creating an attendance, this is going to be an attendance website or piece of software, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Exactly. So I created my attendance app. And so here's everything that's already been given to us. So in here, we have this migrations file directory. We have an admin. We have an apps. We have a models. We have tests. We have views. You don't have to worry about any of this right now. But again, let's go down here. The only thing you're going to need to worry about from today and through Wednesday is the models file and the migrations directory. So this migrations and the models. So in here, this is where we're going to create our models. I'm going to clear this. But the first thing I need to do is actually create a Postgres database. So I'm going to create a Postgres database called school, create DB school. Oh, looks like one already exists. I'm going to drop that database, school. Okay. So I dropped that database. Now I can create that database. And I can do PSQL school. And I can see if there's any tables already created, and no tables have been created. So I exit there. But now I need to connect my Postgres database to my Django project. And in order to do that, I need to go to the settings.py file in the Django, in my school project, and connect it to right here where it says databases. So the default database that Postgres comes with utilizes a SQLite database, which is literally just a file that stores data that we can also run SQL commands on. But we're developers now, and we're not going to be using a SQLite database in any production code. So SQLite databases are just for like getting up a database quickly on your local machine. You're never actually going to be running a production version of a SQLite database. So instead of SQLite, we're going to be using our Postgres database. So Django admin or Django.db.backends, instead of SQLite, we're going to use PostgreSQL. PostgreSQL. And then the name of our database isn't base directory DB SQLite. I think this is the the path to our SQLite file, but we're using Postgres database, so now we can just call it the name of our database, which is school. What questions do you have about connecting a Postgres database to a Django project?
If you were to do another database, would it be inside those magenta brackets, or would it be another set of yellow brackets?
I am not sure. I've never put two databases in the same Django project.
Okay.
But it is possible. You can do it. I know a few cohorts ago, one student did that.
Okay.
All right. Cool. Now, in order for us to use Python and Postgres, there's another library or another module that we need, and we've used it before. Does anybody remember the name of the module or the library that we needed to integrate or use Python and SQL and Postgres? Sorry.
Was it the Psycho
PG2?
Yep, Psycho PG2. So I'm going to need to install Psycho G2 or Psycho PG2. So pip install Psycho G2. So this is again to use Python to interact with our Postgres database. And we need to install this if we're using Postgres. If we're just using the SQLite database that was default, we don't need to install the Psycho G2. All right. So we created an attendance app. We created a school database. We connected our school database to our Django application. And what else so I created the attendance application, but now I need to connect my attendance application, my attendance app, to my school project. And again, I do that here in settings where it says installed apps. I can connect my attendance application. I'm just going to put a comma there for future developers that need to add apps to this project. All right. What questions do you have about creating a Postgres database, connecting it to a Django project in the settings.py file that's located in the school project, and then also creating an app, a Django app within the project and connecting that? All right. So here are our models now. So I'm inside. So now I want to create tables or models for our attendance application in our Postgres database. So what's nice about Django is that it's got really good documentation. So I can say how to create, I think table example. So I've got this, writing your first Django app, part 2. just gonna go back to documentation. So if I do Django models example, so the term models and tables, they're the same thing. So, but in Django, we call models. And so here's Django's documentation. Here are the models. A model is a single definitive source of information about your data. It contains the essential fields and behaviors, blah, blah, blah. So here's a quick example. This example model defines a person, which has a first name and a last name. So I'm just going to copy this over. But instead of having a person, I want to create a student. So actually, let's just create this from scratch. So class student, and then the student class is going to inherit from the built-in Django Models model class, like that. And then I'm going to do first name equals what type of field it is. It can be a char field, it can be an integer, it can be date time. We can do models.char field, and we can make it a max length. So we're passing this parameter, this argument with max length of 200. We can do the same thing for last name. Models.char field.
So
Yep.
Is that char field and max length equals 200, that's a little different than our Postgres sort of verbiage?
Yep.
That because it's Python or because it's Django?
Because it's Django. So if you come in here, so if you in our models, we can see all these different fields. We can click on fields, and you can see all the different field types. I just want to see if there's another field types. I'm going to type in fields or Django field. So here are all the different field options, I guess. Hold on, where are they? So here are the field types. We have auto field, big int, char field, date time field, decimal field. So we have all these different fields to choose from. And if we look at the char field, again, it's a class that's inherited from the models library in the Django DB module. So the char field needs to take in a max length and other options as kwargs. So you can see some specific, so the maximum length in characters of the field is enforced at the database level and in Django's validation using max length validator. Don't worry about that right now. But if you want to use, so for large amounts of text, so such as like if you need to write a paragraph, you might want to use the text field field type. What questions? What other questions do you have?
This one's more sort of general about being a professional developer, but how hard would you say is it to practically change jobs if you've been spending a lot of time either in one language or in one framework to then get hired to start another job where you're doing something else? And then sort of tied to that, how hard is it to convince a hiring manager that your experience in Django and Python is going to be relevant to your experience in JavaScript and whatever framework they use?
Well, it depends on specifically what they're looking for. Like if they're looking, they will say like, hey, we want 2 years of experience in Python or a Python type framework. So I'd say it's actually pretty easy unless they're explicitly looking for someone with like 5 years of experience in Django. But if they're looking for, entry level developer that, within Rail, like Ruby on Rails and React, like the fact that Python and Django, it's pretty relatable. So they're like, oh, well, they know Django and Python. It should be pretty easy for them to learn Ruby and Rails. Yeah, just depends on how senior you are or the position they're looking for is. But yeah, everything's pretty much transferable. Like if you understand the basics of one language and the fundamentals, you'll be able to translate that to another language. And then as far as frameworks, it's just you'll learn on the job if it's something completely new and foreign to you.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. So let's add another one, like email equals, is email? So look, it actually has an email field. So email field is one of them. So models.email field. Looks like I need models here. Max length, let's just keep it at that. 254. Cool.
And sorry, I keep having questions, but
Oh, yeah.
So this email field, all of these fields, one of the benefits to Django is that they have these fields built in, and it'll look for an @ symbol and a domain afterwards, and it'll like validate to make sure that basically it's cleaning your data before it even gets entered, kind of.
I won't say it's cleaning your data. It's just validating it just to make sure it does have an @ symbol field. So you can kind of read here, like the email field max length. It's literally just a char field that checks the value is a valid email address using this email validator. So if I open up validators, this email validator is executed before something is actually inputted into the database. So we're going to get into validators later on, I think tomorrow or Wednesday. So they have these built-in methods that validate specific data before it gets stored in your database.
Hey, Tom, you're in models.py in your attendance folder?
Yep.
Okay. Is it typical to get, why would I be getting an import error on Django DB? Like it's giving me syntax error on from Django.db import models.
I do not know that. I'd have to take a look at it. I have to take a look at that offline. All right. So, for example, say, okay, this is all I need right now for the student. Now, if I go back to here, we created our model student that has an email, a name, first name, last name, and email. Now I need to create a migration script. And in order to do that, I can run Python manage.py, make migrations, followed by the app name. So if I clear that, I can run Python. So before I run that, up in here is this migrations folder. Just keep an eye on that. So this is where all my migration scripts get created. So Python manage.py, make migrations, followed by the app name. So it says migrations for attendance. So that's the name of the app. Created a file called attendance migrations 0001 _ initial.py. And it created a model of student. So now in my migrations directory inside my attendance app, I've got this 0001 _ initial.py. Now this is literally just a script that when I execute this, is going to, when it executes, it's going to do some object relational mapping and convert this into SQL code and insert it into my school database. See, it's got migrations.create model, the name student with the fields of ID, first name, last name, email.
So we're just inserting the table parameters into the PSQL database.
Yep. So we don't touch this file that's created, and this is just a script. When I execute this, it will create the tables in the database. So
this is like kind of creating the schema.
So this would be creating the schema. So I'm creating the models here. This creates the script to convert Python to SQL. So would be creating the models, like the schema in our models file. And this initial.py file, by running python manage.py make migrations, creates the script to actually change or convert the Python code, my models, into actual raw SQL and insert it into our database. So I'm going to come over here. So we're school. So here's my school app or my school database. There's nothing in here yet because I just created the script to do that. Now, if I go back to here, so I created the migration script. Now I need to actually run the migration script. I can run python manage.py migrate. So python manage.py migrate. And I'm going to do attendance. So I'm going to migrate the attendance scripts here. So it says operations to perform, apply all migrations in the attendance app, running migrations. It says applying attendance.0001 initial. So that's that initial file. That's this file I just created. It says okay. That means, hey, it's good. Now, if I come over here in my school app, if I refresh it, I've got my attendance underscore student table. It's got ID, first name, last name, and email. And the way Django creates tables, it creates, because you can have multiple apps with the same table name. So it goes by the name of the app, which is attendance, followed by the name of the actual table name that you created in the models.py file. So attendance underscore student. So attendance underscore student is one right there. And this Django migrations just coincides to, this is automatically created for us. Just keeps track of the different migration scripts. What questions do you have?
Yeah, I have one question. I saw that when you were putting like the first name and last name, but you didn't put an ID field, but an auto-generated one.
Yep.
That's something we just don't have to worry about anymore, or should we still explicitly be like ID?
Nope. So Django already automatically creates an ID field for you. And you can kind of see that here in the initial.py file. How it automatically, it's an auto field, auto created for us. So you don't have to worry about any IDs.
Does it do that with foreign keys too?
No, if you want to create a relationship between databases or between tables, you're going to have to do that yourself. And we'll get into that later on. All right. So again, to create a table, I come into the models inside my attendance app. I open up the models.py file. I create whatever fields or tables I want. I can do multiple in here. I can create like another class of like employee if I wanted to. I execute a make migrations, which creates the initial .py file, which is the initial script, and then I need to execute that script by running python manage.py migrate followed by the app name. That actually applies my tables to my database. What questions do you have?
I have a quick question, Tom.
Yep.
If we were say we already did everything you just did, and we wanted to update the student class, would we just rerun those commands and it would automatically drop and redo it?
Yep. And we're going to do that after break.
Oh, sorry.
Cool. No, you're good. Yeah. I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah. So yeah, let's take a 7-minute break and be back at 10:38, and we'll continue on with this.
Hey, quick question, Tom.